Hi, I'm Christopher Walker with Closely Observed Teaching, and in this video I'd like to tell you about an idea I had recently. I was thinking about the way that we plan our lessons and the different methods that we can use when we're planning and when we're teaching. I'd like to suggest a slightly different method that you might like for teaching some of your lessons. I don't think this is something you can use in every lesson, but I think you might find that it lightens the load, especially in the long term, and it can have some beneficial effects. So, to talk about this, I'm going to go over here. I'm here at the local park here in Bielsko-Biała. This is Słowacji Park. It's a nice outdoor area. There's one woman doing laps on the track just here, and what we can see over here, we've got an all-weather AstroTurf football pitch. Now the reason I want to start here is that I'm really into metaphors. You might know that if you've been watching the channel for a while. I like my metaphors. So the metaphor I want to talk about here has to do with sports and how sports and learning a language can often be very similar. Now imagine that you wanted to be in a football team, or you were in a football team. You'd probably meet quite regularly for some training, and the training would build up from maybe the presentation of a skill. Maybe this is how you do a step over a Cruyff turn, or this is how you play a cross-field pass, something like that. Then you would practice that skill until you had started to internalize the mechanisms by which you affected that skill. And then there would be a kind of production, which would be a game. You would play a game, and your coach would probably watch and suggest to you later how you might improve your skills, how you might factor in what you've been practicing. He could have said, oh, you know, when you were on the wing there, you had a chance to use the Cruyff turn, you didn't do it. Just as a teacher might say, oh, you know, you were talking about those regrets you had. Well, you could have used third conditional there, but you didn't do it. So maybe think about that for next time. So for me, that's kind of the metaphor of PPP, present, practice and produce. And it does work quite well for a lot of lessons, and it is kind of the traditional approach that a lot of teachers favour when they first come into teaching after their CELTA. I mean, it's the CELTA lesson plan really, isn't it? PPP. There are others. You've got project-based teaching. For that I defer to Andre Hedlund on his channel. He's talked a lot about project-based teaching. It's not quite what you think. It's not just doing an art project for one lesson. It's a bit more involved than that. There's TTT, or test, teach, test, where you introduce some language in a kind of test format to see if the students already know it. What they don't know or don't know perfectly, you then teach, and then you kind of do a test again of that. So those are different things. But I was thinking, it doesn't always work that way. Sometimes what you need is more what you can see around me just here. Have a look at all of these different things. So we've got something just here for doing curls. Is it curls? What are they called? When you squeeze your chest together. You've got some sort of rowing machine just here. We've got an elliptical trainer there. We've got a bench press machine over there. We've got all of these different things. And people can very easily come here, go from one station to the next, do some exercise, get fitter, get stronger. But there's no production. There's hardly really a presentation either. It's all practice. It's just that middle P. And I think we do need that in language education. We do need our students sometimes to have lessons that don't necessarily have a presentation element, because they've probably already met a lot of this language before. They don't need maybe they need or they want a production element, but the problem with a lot of production elements is that they don't actually target the language you have in mind. They might target the context, but if you're doing a production task and you give the students free rein, they might not use any of the language that you've been practicing in the class. You've got no control over that sort of thing. Sometimes, in the long run, it really helps for students just to get lots of practice. So I'm going to call this, for want of a better name, and with the proviso that I'm probably stepping on someone's copyright here, I'm going to call this the Crossfit Approach. Well, I've been to CrossFit once. took me weeks to recover from it, but I loved it. It was fantastic, and I did swear I was going to come every week. It's easy to say that when you've not got those delayed onset muscle soreness problems that you usually get the next morning. You know, when you finish, you're like, oh, that was great, I'll come back, I'll do that next week. No, I was too sore. And right now it's not even an option because all the gyms are closed because of the lockdown. Anyway, I'm going off track here. Sometimes I think it's good to have a lesson that resembles a session of CrossFit. You're building the strengths of the student ready for the future when they face it. So what would this look like in practice? Well, I can give you a couple of examples going from the book. I have a student, he's 9 years old. He's not at the stage of really being able to have a conversation in English, but he does know a lot of stuff because he's met a lot of stuff. He's met it all at school, and he's met it with me and in previous years of lessons. But he's not really stitched it all together in his head yet. He just needs more practice of everything. So for our lessons, we're using the Cambridge exam preparation book, Fun for Starters. So the context is introduced in each unit, and it carries through that little unit. It's just 2 pages for a unit, it's tiny. And that context is key because you want everything to be grounded in a particular reality, especially for lower levels. But then each of the tasks basically practices things. So the vocabulary will be about practicing the spelling to go with these different things. Maybe we're looking at animals, so we've got a zoo and you've got 10 animals. Does he know what they're called? Okay, he does, great. Can he spell them? Well, that's where we need to work on his use of the alphabet. Then the next exercise would be, for example, I don't know, spot the difference between 2 pictures, which ties in very nicely with the starters exam. Or saying where things are. Or listen and colour. Listen and write. So there isn't really a presentation. There's a lot of practice, but there's not much production. We have the chance for production. I can ask him what his favourite animal is, and that's it. That's about as far as production goes in that sort of lesson. So at low levels, I find that this works very well because he's building his confidence. He doesn't have the stress of an open-ended production task that he can maybe not do so well at. We're going over things again and again. It's starting to stick, and I know that eventually he'll be ready to take on a bigger challenge in the language classroom. Much like my C1 and C2 level students, for whom the same approach also seems to work well. If you ever look at something like maybe Ready for Advanced or Objective Proficiency, they're pretty good books, but they don't really lend themselves very well to PPP lessons. They kind of do maybe for TTT, project-based possibly, but have you really got the time for such an investment? Sometimes you go into a lesson, there isn't really what would be obviously a start, maybe a little discussion to lead into the topic, but then the practice isn't a practice of a specific piece of language, like this is new to you, because at C1, C2, nothing's new. The only things that are new is going to be lexical stuff. So you're kind of going through it and you take it slow and you discuss everything with the students. So to come back to my little CrossFit analogy, at low levels, all you're doing is trying to build the muscles. So here we've got like the hanging leg raise. Yeah, so you climb up onto this thing, and I think you're supposed to be able to lift your legs up at least a couple of times, and it builds your core muscles. Great. When you start getting to higher levels, you can do variations on that exercise, and you can talk to the person and say, okay, can you tell me what the name of the muscles are? Can you tell me what sort of exercises that will go with? You can widen the scope of discussion based on the practice exercise. So if you ever feel that PPP lessons are trying to fit too many square things into round holes or something like that, and you think that TTT isn't doing it for you, think about occasionally having a CrossFit-style lesson where it's just about practicing things with your students. It's not about necessarily producing, doing a big kind of, role play or a conversation at the end or a piece of writing, but rather you're just doing these things to build their skills for the long run. give it a try, see how it goes. I've been doing it, and I think that the results are more than satisfactory. And on that note, I think I shall say farewell. The sun is finally coming out. Glory. All that just means that the snow is all going to melt, and I'm going to get my boots all wet on the way home. You can't win them all, can you? Until next time, thank you very much, and goodbye.